Emotional freedom usually begins more quietly than you expect. It does not always begin with a final conversation or a dramatic decision or a message where you explain everything you have been carrying. Sometimes it begins in a much smaller moment, when you feel the old urge to prove that you are done, and you realize that even this need to prove something is still a form of attachment. That realization can be uncomfortable, because when someone hurts you, or disappoints you, or treats your presence carelessly, a part of you naturally wants the ending to be seen. You may want them to understand that something has changed. You may want them to notice that you are no longer available in the same way. You may want your silence to carry a message clear enough to make them feel the weight of what they lost. There is nothing strange about that. It is a very human impulse. Pain often wants witnesses. When you have been patient for too long, or forgiving for too long, or quietly hoping that someone would treat you with more care, it can feel almost unfair to detach without making the detachment visible. Part of the heart wants to say, "Look, I am finally walking away. I am finally choosing myself. I am not the same person who kept returning." But this is where the first rule matters. 1. Stop announcing your detachment. Real detachment does not need to be announced, not because your feelings are unimportant, and not because the other person deserves endless silence from you. There are moments when a clear sentence is necessary. A boundary may need to be spoken. A final explanation may be appropriate when the relationship has enough honesty to hold it. Stoicism is not about disappearing every time something hurts. The problem begins when explanation becomes another way of staying emotionally tied. You may think you are closing the door, while secretly hoping they will hear the sound of it. You may believe you are protecting your dignity, but some part of the message still wants a reaction. Regret, concern, apology, curiosity, anything that proves your absence has reached them. That is not failure. It is just something to notice. A person can leave physically and still remain inwardly attached through the need to be understood. The body steps away, but the mind stays near the old place, watching for signs. Did they notice the distance? Did they understand why you changed? Do they think you are weak, cold, dramatic, unfair? Are they telling the story wrong? These questions can keep you connected to the very thing you are trying to outgrow. And quietly, the other person remains at the center. This is why silent detachment has to be honest. It cannot simply be a new strategy to make someone feel your absence. If your silence is built around their reaction, then they are still guiding your inner life. The method has changed, but the dependence remains. A cleaner silence feels different. It is not trying to punish. It is not trying to appear powerful. It is not waiting by the window of the other person's attention. It comes from the simple recognition that your peace has already spent enough time inside this pattern. You do not become quiet because you have nothing to feel. You become quiet because not every feeling deserves to become another conversation. That is a subtle difference, but it matters. There are feelings that need expression, and there are feelings that only ask for expression because they want to keep the wound open. Anger may want one more sentence. Pride may want the perfect closing line. Hurt may want the other person to finally see what they refused to see before. Yet, after a certain point, more speech does not always create more truth. Sometimes it only gives pain another place to move. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to return to the command of his own mind, especially when other people acted poorly. He did not believe peace depended on forcing the world to become fair before the soul could become steady. The work was closer, quieter, and more difficult, to keep another person's disorder from becoming your own. That is exactly what silent detachment asks from you. Someone else may misunderstand your distance. They may call it coldness. They may believe you changed suddenly, even though the change happened after a long period of quiet disappointment. They may never know how many times you tried to stay open, patient, generous and fair before you finally stepped back. Still, your peace cannot depend on them describing your growth correctly. That is a hard truth, especially if you care about being seen accurately. Most thoughtful people do. You do not want to be misunderstood. You do not want someone to think you are cruel when you are simply tired. You do not want your boundary to be mistaken for arrogance, or your silence to be treated as proof that you never cared. But some people will interpret you through the limits of their own awareness. If they benefited from the version of you that explained too much, returned too easily, and softened your needs to keep the peace, then your quiet distance may feel offensive to them. They may not see it as healing. They may see it as rejection. In their mind, your boundary interrupts the arrangement they were comfortable with. That does not make the boundary wrong. It only means you are no longer arranging your behavior around their comfort. This is where the friend-to-friend truth has to be plain. If you keep announcing that you are detached, part of you may still be asking for permission to detach. You may be waiting for them to agree that you have a right to leave, waiting for them to admit that you were hurt, waiting for them to understand the full story before you allow yourself to stop carrying it. But closure that depends entirely on another person's maturity is a fragile kind of closure. Sometimes the cleanest ending is not the one where everything is finally understood. Sometimes it is the one where you stop needing the misunderstanding to be repaired before you return to yourself. This does not mean you leave with bitterness. Bitterness keeps its own chain. A bitter person may stop speaking, but inwardly they are still in the argument every day. They keep proving, defending, remembering, and rehearsing. The silence may look calm from the outside, but inside, the old person still occupies too much room. Silent detachment is not that. It is more like putting something down without throwing it. You recognize the weight, you understand why you carried it, and then you admit that carrying it further will not make you more loving, more loyal, or more free. There is no need to make a speech out of that. Your life can begin showing the decision. You answer less from the wound. You stop offering long explanations where short clarity is enough. You no longer return to the same emotional loop, hoping this time it will become different. Slowly, your attention starts coming back to your own work, your body, your routines, your faith, your friendships, your future. That return is the real evidence of detachment. Not whether they notice, whether you notice, whether your mornings become less shaped by them, whether your mind stops drafting messages you do not truly need to send, whether you can feel the ache without turning it into performance, whether your silence begins to feel less like waiting and more like rest. At first, it may not feel peaceful. It may feel incomplete. The ego likes visible endings. It wants the final scene where your absence lands perfectly, where the other person understands, regrets, and realizes your value. Life often refuses to provide that scene. Many endings are quieter than the ego wants. No confession, no apology, no one standing there with the exact words your heart hoped to hear. That can feel unfair. But emotional freedom often begins at the point where you stop asking life to give you a dramatic ending before you allow yourself a real one. A real ending may be private. It may happen while nothing outside changes. The other person may continue believing their version. They may never ask the right question. They may never realize how long you tried. Yet inside, something settles. Not because the story became perfect, but because you finally stopped making your peace dependent on their awareness. This is why the first rule is not really about silence. It is about ownership. Who owns your attention now? Who owns the room inside your mind? Who decides whether the day is steady or disturbed? If your detachment still needs their reaction, then some part of your emotional life is still rented to them. The work is to bring it back, quietly, without making the return another performance, without turning your healing into a message designed for someone else to decode. You do not need to announce that you are choosing yourself. Begin choosing yourself in ways that are too consistent to require announcement. Care for your life. Protect your mind. Let the old argument end where it has already taught you enough. Step away from the pattern, not to make them suffer, but because staying available to it keeps making you suffer. That is the difference. Silent treatment is about control. Silent detachment is about release. One waits for the other person to feel something. The other stops waiting. One is still tied to reaction. The other returns to responsibility. One tries to make silence loud. The other lets silence become clean. And clean silence has a calm strength to it. It does not need to injure. It does not need to explain itself again and again. It does not ask everyone to understand. It simply protects the part of you that kept getting pulled into conversations, expectations, and emotional patterns that were costing too much. So the first step is simple, but not easy. Allow your detachment to become quieter than your pain wants it to be. Let it live in your conduct before it lives in anyone else's opinion. Because the moment you no longer need them to know that you are free, something in you has already begun to loosen. And from there, the next challenge appears, the first reaction. Even if you choose silence, the first wave of pain will still test whether you are acting from peace or only holding back a reaction that has not yet been mastered. 2. Control the first reaction. The first reaction is usually the most honest part of the wound, but not always the wisest part of you. That is why it feels so urgent. Something happens, and before your mind has fully understood it, the body is already preparing a response. A message appears on the screen. A tone changes. Someone says something careless, or becomes distant, or acts as if what hurt you should not have hurt you at all. In that first moment, your inner world tightens. The chest reacts before the judgment arrives. The hands want to type. The mouth wants to defend. The mind begins gathering every sentence it has been holding back. It can feel almost impossible not to respond immediately, and maybe that is the point. The first reaction is where emotional freedom is tested before it becomes visible anywhere else. It is not tested in the calm moment, when you already feel composed and wise. It is tested in the instant where pain tries to borrow your voice. That instant matters more than it looks. A person can spend months learning about peace, discipline, detachment, and self-respect, then lose the whole practice in one impulsive reply, not because they are weak, but because the first reaction often carries the oldest part of the wound. It is not only responding to what happened now, it may also be responding to every earlier moment where you felt dismissed, abandoned, ignored, mocked, or unseen. That is why the reaction can feel larger than the event. The present touches something old, and suddenly the old thing wants to speak. This is where you have to be careful with speed. Speed often feels like strength when you are hurt. A fast reply can feel like self-respect. A sharp sentence can feel like protection. The mind enjoys the feeling of having an answer ready, especially when the heart feels exposed. But a quick reaction can be a very expensive kind of relief. It gives you a few seconds of power, then leaves you to live with the tone you used, the message you sent, the version of yourself that took over before your better judgment arrived. Sometimes the situation was already painful, and the reaction only adds another layer: regret. That is a heavy combination. Pain from what they did, then disappointment in how you responded. This does not mean you should become afraid of emotion. Emotion is not the enemy. Anger can show you where a boundary has been crossed. Hurt can reveal what mattered. Disappointment can point toward a truth you were avoiding. The problem is not that you feel something. The problem begins when the first feeling is allowed to become the final authority. A feeling can be real without being ready to lead. That distinction is small, but it can save you from many things. Seneca wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." It is a simple sentence, almost too simple until you need it. Delay does not mean pretending you are calm. It does not mean swallowing the truth or letting someone treat you carelessly. It means giving wisdom enough time to arrive before the wound writes the response. Sometimes all you need is a little distance between the injury and the answer, not a week, not a grand strategy, just enough space to let the body settle and the mind return. A few breaths, a walk away from the phone, a glass of water, one night before sending the message that feels necessary at midnight. That space may look ordinary, but inside it, the direction of the whole situation can change. Because the first reaction usually wants discharge, the wiser response wants direction. Discharge is interested in release. It wants to say the thing, send the thing, prove the thing, make the other person feel the heat of what they caused. Direction is more patient. It asks what response will still feel clean tomorrow. It cares about your character after the moment passes. It understands that not every truthful feeling deserves an immediate expression. This is the kind of control people often misunderstand. Control does not mean you feel nothing. It means you do not let the first wave decide the shape of your conduct. There is a quiet dignity in being able to pause while something inside you is burning. Not because the burning is fake, and not because you are above pain. You pause because you have learned that the part of you that is hurt is not the only part of you that deserves a voice. Your pride wants a voice. Your anger wants one too. So does your fear of being misunderstood. But there is also a steadier part of you, the part that knows what kind of person you are trying to become. That part speaks more softly. It rarely wins if you answer too quickly. So the pause is not emptiness. It is protection for the quieter intelligence inside you. Think of the last time you reacted too fast, not the event itself, but the feeling afterward. There is often a strange drop once the message is sent or the sentence leaves your mouth. The intensity fades, and the mind begins replaying what happened from a cooler place. Maybe the words were not entirely false, but the way they came out no longer feels like you. The reaction may have defended your pain, but it did not represent your values. That difference matters. You can be right in content and still wrong in spirit. You can tell the truth in a way that makes you smaller. This is especially important when you are detaching. The other person may already be losing access to you, and that loss may create tension. There may be old patterns trying to pull you back, explaining, defending, proving, correcting, making sure they understand every layer of your intention. If the first reaction controls you, detachment becomes unstable. You step away, then one provocation brings you back into the same emotional room. The body leaves, the reaction returns. That is why controlling the first reaction is not a small technique. It is the gatekeeper of your freedom. If every careless word can still pull you into a long exchange, then the old pattern still has a key. If one accusation can make you abandon your calm, then their opinion still has more access than it should. If a moment of silence from them can make you act against your own dignity, then the work is not finished. There is no shame in that. It only shows where the training is needed. Stoicism is practical because it does not ask you to wait for perfect conditions. It meets you exactly there, in the difficult second before you respond. The philosophy becomes real when the message is open. The emotions are high, and the old version of you is ready to take control. Not in theory, not in a quote, right there, in the ordinary, uncomfortable moment. The question becomes simple. Who is about to answer? Is it your wound? Is it your pride? Is it the fear of looking weak? Or is it the part of you that can still choose the kind of person you want to be, even while hurting? This question does not need to be dramatic. It can be asked quietly. Sometimes the only thing that changes is that you do not send the message yet. You leave the room before the conversation becomes cruel. You read what you wrote and realize it was true, but not useful. You decide that clarity can wait until your nervous system is not trying to fight a war. That is not weakness. It is timing. And timing is part of wisdom. A truth spoken at the wrong emotional temperature can become less effective than silence. The other person may focus on your tone instead of your point. You may give them a reason to avoid the real issue. Worse, you may walk away feeling that the situation changed you into someone you did not want to become. That is too much to pay for one immediate release. There are moments, of course, when a response must be firm and immediate. Some situations require directness. A boundary may need to be stated clearly in the moment. Silence is not always the answer, but even then, the goal is not to let panic or rage choose the words. A firm response does not have to be a reactive one. There is a difference between "I need to answer now" and "I need to answer from this state." The second is where trouble begins. If the state is unstable, the response will usually carry that instability. The words may sound strong, but underneath them there is desperation for control. You are not only addressing the situation, you are trying to make the discomfort stop. That urgency can make you over-explain, over-accuse, over-defend, or reveal more of yourself than the moment deserves. A calmer response may say less and carry more weight. It does not need to prove everything. It does not need to win the whole emotional history in one message. It only needs to be clean enough that you can respect it later. That should be the standard. Can I respect this later? Not, will this make them feel guilty? Not, will this prove I am not weak? Not, will this finally make them understand everything? Those questions keep the response tied to their reaction. The better question returns the authority to you. It asks whether the next thing you do will preserve your character, your clarity, and your peace after the emotional heat fades. This is how self-control becomes intimate. It is not a cold rule imposed from outside. It is a form of care for the person you will be after the moment passes. You are protecting tomorrow's self from having to clean up what tonight's pain wanted to throw into the room. That is a kind thing to do for yourself, and it becomes easier with practice. The first pause may feel unnatural, the second may still feel forced. For a while the body will insist that urgency means necessity, but slowly you begin to recognize the old pattern. The rush appears, and instead of obeying it immediately, you watch it. The anger comes, and you give it space without handing it the pen. The hurt rises, but it no longer gets to decide the whole conversation. The gap widens. A small space opens between feeling and action. In that space, freedom begins to become real. Not perfect, real. You may still feel the sting. You may still think of the sentence you wish you could say. Some part of you may still want to make the other person understand exactly how careless they were. But now there is another part present too, a steadier one, reminding you that your response is not only about them, it is also about what you are practicing inside yourself. Every reaction trains something. A fast, wounded reply trains the mind to let pain lead. A delayed, cleaner response trains the mind to return to judgment before action. Over time, these repetitions become character, not in theory, but in the way you behave when you are touched where it hurts. That is why the first reaction matters. It is not just one message. It is not just one sentence. It is a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. If you can hold that first wave without letting it carry you away, detachment becomes more than distance. It becomes inner authority. You no longer need the other person to behave well before you behave with discipline. You no longer let their immaturity decide your tone. You stop measuring strength by how quickly you answer and begin measuring it by how cleanly you choose. This is not easy work, but it is honest work. The next time something in you wants to react immediately, try not to hate the impulse. It is telling you that something hurts. Listen to that much, but do not give it the whole room. Let the pain report what happened. Let wisdom decide what should be done with the report. That is the balance. You are not suppressing the wound. You are refusing to let the wound become your ruler. And once you learn to control the first reaction, you become ready for a deeper kind of detachment, seeing people as they reveal themselves, instead of staying attached to the version of them you hoped they would be. 3. Accept people as their patterns reveal them. Once you learn to slow the first reaction, you begin to see something that reaction often hides. People reveal themselves over time, not only through what they say in emotional moments, and not only through the version of themselves they present when they want to be understood well. They reveal themselves through patterns, through what repeats, through how they handle discomfort, responsibility, honesty, distance, apology, silence, and the effect their behavior has on other people. That kind of seeing can be painful, because many times the heart does not want a pattern. It wants an explanation. It wants the difficult behavior to be an exception, a misunderstanding, a bad day, a wound from the past, a fear they will eventually overcome. It wants the warm moments to be the real person, and the painful moments to be temporary weather. Sometimes that is true. People are not machines. They can have bad seasons. They can act from fear and later grow. They can be inconsistent for a while and then become more honest with themselves. No wise person judges an entire character from one difficult moment, but repeated behavior asks for a different kind of honesty. If someone is kind once and careless often, the kindness is real, but so is the carelessness. If they apologize beautifully and repeat the same wound, the apology may have emotion, but the pattern has more authority. If they become warm only when you begin to pull away, then the warmth may not be intimacy. It may be their discomfort with losing access. This is hard to accept because patterns do not always appear dramatically. They arrive quietly. A small disappointment here, a conversation avoided there, a promise softened, delayed or forgotten, a boundary treated as an inconvenience, a moment where you express pain, and somehow you become the one comforting them. Nothing may look severe enough by itself, so the mind keeps minimizing each piece. But the body often keeps count. It remembers the tension before you speak. It remembers how careful you became with your needs. It remembers the strange exhaustion after explaining something that should not have required so much explanation. Long before the mind is ready to call it a pattern, the body may already be living as if one exists. That information matters. A Stoic life is not built on fantasy. It is built on seeing what is actually in front of you, even when the truth is inconvenient. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to look at things plainly, not through fear, not through resentment, but without the decorations the mind adds when it wants reality to be more comfortable than it is. That is the spirit of this rule. Accept people as their patterns reveal them. Not as your hope edits them, not as their words decorate them, not as they might become if every obstacle inside them suddenly disappeared. as their conduct keeps showing them to be. This does not mean you reduce a person to their worst moment. That would be unfair. Everyone has moments they are not proud of. You have them too. A mature mind leaves room for growth, context, repentance, and change. The point is not to become suspicious of everyone. The point is to stop letting a few beautiful exceptions erase a painful pattern. That is where attachment becomes dangerous. One tender message can make you forget weeks of uncertainty. One apology can soften your memory of the same wound happening many times. A rare moment of clarity can convince you that the person is finally becoming who you hoped they were, even if the next few days quietly return to the old rhythm. The mind can become loyal to the exception because the exception keeps hope alive. The pattern, if accepted, may require a decision, and decisions are often more frightening than hope. Hope allows you to remain emotionally near. It gives you a reason to wait, to explain again, to stay patient, to believe that the real person is hidden underneath the behavior. Acceptance asks for something harder. It asks you to stop treating potential as if it were presence. A person's potential can be beautiful. It can also be irrelevant to your peace if they are not living from it. This is not a cruel thing to say. It is simply clean. Someone may have depth they have not learned to practice. They may have love they do not know how to express steadily. They may have good intentions that collapse whenever responsibility is required. All of that can be true, and still, you are the one living with the effect of their pattern. You do not live with their potential, you live with their behavior. That sentence can feel heavy, but it brings the mind back to reality. Many people stay attached to the person they believe someone could become. They fall in love with the healed version, the honest version, the version who finally understands, the version who stops running, the version who gives consistently what was once given only in flashes. In the imagination, that version can feel very close. In real life, it may never arrive. And your nervous system cannot build peace on a person who only exists in possibility. It needs what is repeated: steadiness, respect, clarity, accountability, care that does not appear only when distance threatens the connection. A person who cares about you in a way that is livable will not require you to survive on rare moments of warmth while explaining away the regular presence of confusion. This is where acceptance becomes merciful, even though it hurts at first. You stop demanding that they become someone else before you can make a sane decision. You stop keeping the case open forever. The evidence may not be what you wanted, but it is still evidence. Their behavior has been speaking for a long time, even when your hope kept translating it into something gentler. A calm kind of grief may come with that realization, because accepting a pattern often means losing the imagined version of the person, the one you kept defending inside your own mind, the one who would have loved you properly if life were different, if fear were smaller, if timing were kinder, if they were less wounded, more aware, more ready. Maybe that version exists somewhere in them, but you cannot have a relationship with somewhere. You can only respond to what is actually being lived. This is one reason detachment becomes easier after clarity. Before clarity, distance feels like betrayal. You feel guilty for stepping back because the mind keeps showing you the best parts. After clarity, distance begins to feel less like punishment and more like alignment. You are no longer leaving because you hate them. You are leaving because the pattern has become visible enough that staying would require you to betray what you know. That is a very different kind of distance. It does not need anger to justify itself. It does not need to exaggerate the other person's faults. It simply respects reality. And reality does not always need to be dramatic to be decisive. Someone does not have to destroy you to show they are not safe for your peace. They do not have to become a villain before you are allowed to step back. A pattern of confusion can be enough. A pattern of disregard can be enough. A pattern of making you feel alone inside the connection can be enough. You are allowed to take quiet evidence seriously. This can be difficult if you are used to waiting until things become unbearable. Some people only allow themselves to leave when the pain becomes obvious enough to defend in front of others. They need a dramatic injury, a final betrayal, a clear reason no one can question. But wisdom does not always wait for disaster. Sometimes it notices the direction before the collapse. This is where Stoicism becomes practical again. It teaches you to give more authority to what is within your control than to what you wish other people would become. You cannot control whether someone develops self-awareness. You cannot control whether they finally understand the cost of their behavior. Their willingness to change belongs to them. Your responsibility is closer, to see clearly, to stop negotiating with repeated evidence, to decide how much access a pattern should have to your peace. That does not require hatred. In fact, hatred can make the seeing less accurate. When anger takes over, you may start turning the person into a monster just to make the distance easier. That is still not freedom. The cleaner path is more balanced. They may be human, wounded, complicated, and still not right for your inner life. You can have compassion without giving unlimited access. That distinction is important. Compassion recognizes that people act from wounds, fears, histories, and limitations. Access is different. Access is the place they are allowed to occupy in your life, your attention, your emotional availability, your private peace. Someone can deserve compassion as a human being and still not deserve the same closeness to you. This is not cold. It is responsible. A person's wounds may explain their pattern, but they do not cancel the effect of it. You can understand why someone behaves a certain way and still decide that the behavior is too costly to keep absorbing. Understanding is not the same as permission. There is a quiet maturity in that. You stop asking, "How can I make them see?" and begin asking, "What have they already shown?" The shift is subtle, but it changes the whole emotional position. One question keeps you working on them. The other brings you back to reality. And once reality is seen, the heart may still need time to follow. That is normal. The mind can accept a pattern before the emotions are ready to release the attachment. You may still miss the warm parts. You may still remember the beginning. Something in you may continue hoping that this time will be different. Do not attack that part. It is not stupid. It is simply grieving the person it wanted them to be. Give it patience, but do not let it drive. You can feel love and still respect evidence. You can miss someone and still admit what repeated. You can wish them healing and still remove yourself from the place where their unhealed parts keep injuring you. This is one of the deeper forms of emotional freedom. The ability to see someone without needing to hate them and to detach without needing to deny that they mattered. Because sometimes the hardest part is not seeing the pattern. It is accepting that seeing it creates a responsibility. Once you know, you cannot unknow. Once the repeated behavior becomes clear, staying the same way begins to cost more. The old explanations start losing their power. The excuses no longer soothe as much. You may still feel attached, but a wiser part of you now understands that attachment alone is not enough reason to remain available. That wiser part deserves your loyalty, not the fantasy, not the exception, not the version of them that only appears when you are afraid to leave. The part of you that has seen the pattern calmly and knows that peace requires honesty. This does not have to make you harsh. It can make you quieter. You no longer need to argue with the evidence. You no longer need to convince them of what their behavior has already made clear. The energy once spent explaining the pattern can begin returning to your own life. That return is part of detachment. And as it happens, another freedom becomes possible. Freedom from their opinion of you, because once you accept people as their patterns reveal them, you also begin to understand that not everyone's judgment deserves a home inside your mind. 4. Detach from their opinion of you. Once you begin seeing people through their patterns, their opinion of you starts to feel different. Not harmless exactly, it may still sting. Being misunderstood can hurt, especially when you know you acted with more patience, more care, or more restraint than they are willing to admit. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from being judged by someone who did not fully understand what you carried. Still, their opinion is not the same as the truth. It is only their view from where they stand, and where they stand may be shaped by pride, fear, defensiveness, immaturity, pain, or the simple desire not to see their own part clearly. A person can speak confidently about you and still be speaking from a very small window. Confidence does not make their judgment accurate. Volume does not make it fair. Distance does not make them wise. That is worth remembering, because when you are emotionally attached, their opinion can feel larger than it deserves to be. A single sentence from them can disturb your whole day. One unfair description can send you back into explanation. If they call you cold, you want to prove you cared. If they call you dramatic, you want to show how much you held in. When they misunderstand your silence, something in you wants to reopen the whole story just to correct the way they are seeing you. That desire is very human. No one wants to be misread by someone who mattered. But there is a hidden trap here. The more you try to control their opinion, the more their opinion begins to control you. You may think you are defending your character, while in reality your character is being pulled into another performance. The mind becomes busy managing an image instead of protecting peace. This is a subtle form of captivity. A person may no longer have direct access to your life, yet their judgment still shapes your inner weather. You imagine what they think. You rehearse what you would say if they accused you. Their possible version of the story starts living beside you, even when they are not present. At that point, the problem is no longer only their opinion. It is the authority you have given it. Stoicism does not ask you to become indifferent to reputation in a foolish way. Reputation can matter in practical situations. Character can be misrepresented in ways that need correction. There are moments when truth should be spoken clearly, especially when silence would allow real harm to grow. But most emotional entanglements are not solved by endless image repair. After one honest clarification, after a boundary has been stated, after your conduct has already spoken, there may be nothing more to protect except your ego's desire to be seen perfectly. That desire can become exhausting because no human being is seen perfectly by everyone. Someone will always misunderstand the part they were not mature enough to meet. That does not mean you should keep returning to explain it. Epictetus often pointed people back to what belonged to them and what did not. Your intentions, your choices, your discipline, your honesty, these are close enough to examine and correct. Another person's interpretation lives in a more unstable place. You can influence it sometimes, but you cannot own it. You cannot enter their mind and arrange every thought until it becomes fair. Trying to do that will make your peace dependent on a house you do not live in. This is where detachment becomes practical. Instead of asking, "How do I make them see me correctly?" a better question begins to form. Have I acted in a way I can stand beside? That question brings the power back. If the answer is no, then repair what is yours. Apologize if you need to. Clarify what deserves clarification. Take responsibility without hiding behind pride. Emotional freedom is not the freedom to avoid accountability. But if the answer is yes, if you know you acted with sincerity, patience, and enough honesty for the situation, then continuing to chase their approval may only weaken the very dignity you are trying to defend. There is a quiet moment when you have to let someone be wrong about you, not because it feels good, because correcting them would cost more than their misunderstanding is worth. This is hard for the part of you that wants justice in the story. The mind wants a clean ending where everyone sees the truth. It wants the person who judged you unfairly to recognize the full picture. Maybe they finally admit that you tried. Maybe they understand why you stepped away. Maybe they realize your silence was not cruelty, but exhaustion. Sometimes that recognition comes. Often it does not. A life built on emotional freedom cannot wait for it. If you require every person to understand you before you can be at peace, then your peace will remain in public hands. It will depend on people whose self-awareness may be limited, whose memories may be selective, and whose pride may need you to be the problem so they do not have to face themselves. That is too fragile. And honestly, it is too unfair to you. You have lived inside your own story. You know the nights you spent thinking, the patience you extended, the words you softened, the chances you gave, the signs you ignored because you wanted things to work. Another person may reduce all of that to one convenient explanation. They may call you distant without understanding how much closeness had already cost you. Let the reduction be theirs. Do not make it your prison. This does not mean you become arrogant. Arrogance refuses correction because it cannot bear humility. Detachment from opinion is different. It listens when there is truth, learns what is useful, and releases what is distorted. The ego rejects everything that hurts. Wisdom examines the wound before deciding what belongs there. That balance matters. Sometimes criticism hurts because it is false. At other times it hurts because it touches something true. A mature person does not dismiss every uncomfortable opinion as ignorance. He asks whether there is a lesson inside it. If there is, he takes the lesson without handing over his whole identity. If there is not, he lets the noise pass without building a home around it. This is how you become less easy to control. Not by pretending you do not care, by caring more about truth than image. Image is fragile because it depends on how others narrate you. Truth is steadier because it depends on what you know, what you practice, and what you are willing to correct. The more your life is rooted in truth, the less desperate you become to be described correctly by people who may not be committed to fairness. There is a deep relief in that. You stop preparing imaginary defenses. Conversations that once happened in your head begin to lose energy. Their opinion may still appear in your thoughts, but it no longer gets to hold court all night. A person may misunderstand your silence, your boundary, or your distance. And for the first time, you do not feel forced to abandon your peace just to edit their conclusion. That is a serious kind of freedom. It may not feel dramatic, but it changes how you move through the world. You become less reactive to accusations, less hungry for approval, less frightened by being disliked. You no longer treat every false judgment as an emergency that must be solved before you can breathe. A false judgment can be unpleasant without becoming your master. That sentence is worth living with for a while. There will be people who only understand your boundaries as rejection. Some will interpret your calm as indifference because they only recognize love when it suffers loudly. Others may call you selfish when you stop overextending yourself in the ways they preferred. If your inner life still depends on their approval, you will be tempted to shrink back into old patterns just to be seen as good again. That is how opinion becomes a leash. It does not pull your body first, it pulls your identity. You begin acting not from your values, but from the fear of being described badly. You forgive before you are ready because you do not want to seem bitter. You explain more than necessary because you fear looking cruel. Perhaps you stay available because someone might call your distance cold. Little by little, your choices become shaped by the image you are trying to protect. This is not peace. It is reputation management inside the soul. The Stoic path offers something cleaner. Live in such a way that your own conscience becomes a more reliable witness than another person's mood. If correction is needed, make it. If your conduct was poor, improve it. But if your behavior was guided by dignity, honesty, and self-respect, then their opinion does not get to overturn the evidence of your own character. You do not have to keep appealing your case to someone who benefits from misunderstanding it. There is a point where silence becomes healthier than defense. Again, not the bitter silence that secretly wants to win. A healthier silence has accepted that another person may carry a version of you that you do not recognize. It may feel unfair, but it is not fatal. You can live well without being accurately described by everyone who has known you. In fact, you have to. No one reaches emotional freedom while trying to remain approved of by every person they disappoint, outgrow, or leave behind. This is especially true when detachment changes a relationship. The old version of you may have been easier for them to like, more available, more explainable, more willing to absorb discomfort so the connection could remain undisturbed. Once you become quieter, firmer, and less reactive, their opinion may change. That change does not automatically mean you have become worse. It may mean you have become less useful to a pattern that depended on your overgiving. Allow that possibility. Not with pride, just with clarity. If someone liked you most when you ignored your own limits, their disappointment may not be a sign that you are doing something wrong. It may be evidence that your limits have finally become real. A person who was comfortable with your self-abandonment may struggle to respect your self-command. That is painful, but it is not surprising. So when their opinion begins to disturb you, return to the quieter question. What is actually mine here? Your tone is yours. Your honesty is yours. Your boundaries are yours. Your willingness to learn is yours. The stories they tell themselves to avoid discomfort are not fully yours. The meaning they attach to your distance is not fully yours. Their need to make you the villain so they can remain innocent is not fully yours. Let what belongs to them remain with them. That may be one of the hardest parts of detachment. Not walking away physically, but allowing another person to keep a thought about you that you do not rush to correct. It requires trust in something deeper than reputation. It requires a relationship with yourself strong enough to survive being misnamed. When that relationship grows, you become calmer. You still prefer to be understood, but you no longer need universal understanding in order to stand. You still care about your character, but you do not confuse character with everyone's opinion of it. You still listen when criticism contains truth, but you stop treating every judgment as a verdict. That is emotional freedom in practice. Not the absence of feeling, the absence of slavery to interpretation. And as this freedom grows, distance becomes easier to choose at the right time. Because once you stop living under their opinion, you can finally ask a more important question. Should I step back now before this pain turns into resentment? 5. Choose distance. Before pain turns into resentment, there is a kind of distance that arrives too late. By the time it comes, the heart is already tired. The voice has become sharper. The patience that once felt generous now feels forced. Even small things begin to irritate you, not because they are so serious on their own, but because they touch a long history of moments you swallowed, explained, excused, or carried quietly. This is how resentment begins. Not usually in one dramatic moment. More often, it collects slowly. A disappointment that was never addressed. A boundary you did not want to set because you hoped things would improve naturally. An apology accepted before the wound had time to speak. A pattern you kept calling temporary because admitting it was a pattern would have required a decision. At first, you may think you are being patient, and maybe you are. Patience has its place. Every meaningful relationship requires some of it. People make mistakes. They misunderstand, react poorly, need time, and sometimes grow only after seeing the effect of their behavior. A person who leaves at the first sign of discomfort will never build anything deep. But patience becomes dangerous when it turns into quiet self-neglect. There is a difference between giving someone room to grow and giving a pattern permission to continue. The first has dignity in it. The second slowly teaches your heart that its pain does not matter unless it becomes unbearable. That is why distance sometimes has to come earlier than the anger. Not as a punishment, not as a dramatic exit, not as a way of making the other person afraid. Distance can simply be the moment you recognize that staying too close is beginning to change the quality of your heart. And that matters, because the goal is not only to survive the situation, it is to survive it without becoming bitter, cruel, suspicious, or emotionally hardened in ways you will later mistake for wisdom. Many people wait until resentment gives them permission to leave. They stay through repeated disappointment, repeated confusion, repeated emotional overextension, until eventually something inside them becomes cold enough to detach. By then, leaving may be easier, but it is also heavier. The distance is no longer clean. It carries all the anger that was not listened to earlier. A cleaner distance often begins before hatred appears. It begins when you can still see the other person as human, but you also see that closeness to them is becoming costly. There is still compassion, but not enough denial to keep pretending. You can understand some of their wounds, perhaps even feel sadness for them, while admitting that understanding their pain does not mean you must continue absorbing the consequences of it. This is a mature kind of separation. Quiet, sad, but sane. You do not need to wait until someone becomes a villain before you are allowed to step back. That belief keeps many people trapped. They look for a reason dramatic enough to justify distance. If the other person did something unforgivable, then leaving feels easier to defend. If the harm is subtle, repeated, and difficult to explain, they question themselves. But repeated small wounds can shape you just as deeply as one obvious betrayal. A person does not have to destroy your life to disturb your peace beyond what is healthy. They may simply keep pulling you into confusion. They may make you feel responsible for emotions that are not yours to manage. Perhaps every conversation ends with you doubting your own perception. Over time, even without one dramatic injury, you become less steady around them. That is enough to notice. Distance does not always need a courtroom. Sometimes it only needs honesty. Seneca wrote with great seriousness about anger because he understood how easily it takes possession of the mind. Anger rarely feels like a loss of control at first. It feels like clarity. It feels like strength. It feels like the part of you that finally refuses to be humiliated. Yet if it grows unchecked, it often damages the person carrying it long before it reaches the person who caused it. Resentment works in a similar way. It convinces you that you are protecting yourself while slowly poisoning the inner space you are trying to protect. This is why stepping back early can be an act of mercy. Mercy toward yourself because you stop standing in the place where the wound keeps reopening. Mercy toward the other person because you leave before your heart starts speaking from accumulated bitterness. Even if they do not understand that mercy, It still matters that you chose not to let the situation turn you into someone harsher. There is a quiet tragedy in staying too long. You begin by wanting to preserve the connection. You want to be fair. You do not want to overreact. You remember the good parts, so you keep making room for the difficult ones. But slowly, the effort to preserve the relationship starts damaging the part of you that was capable of love in the first place. Your warmth becomes guarded. Your generosity becomes accounting. Your patience becomes resentment, wearing a calm face. Once that happens, even kind gestures can begin to feel heavy. You may respond politely, but something inside is keeping score. You may forgive outwardly while inwardly collecting evidence. The relationship continues, but the heart is no longer open in the same way. It has begun protecting itself through distance that should have been chosen more consciously earlier. This is why emotional freedom requires timing. Too much delay can make a clean boundary impossible. The longer you ignore what hurts you, the more likely the final boundary will come out with unnecessary force. Not because you are a bad person, but because the truth has been held down for too long. When it finally rises, it may come with all the pressure of what was postponed. A calmer path is available, but it requires listening sooner. The first signs are usually quiet. You notice that your body tenses before a conversation. You feel relief when they are absent, then guilt for feeling relief. There is a pattern of rehearsing what to say because you expect to be misunderstood. A relationship that once felt like a place of connection begins to feel like a place where you must manage yourself carefully to avoid another emotional cost. These signs deserve respect. They are not always instructions to disappear. Sometimes they are invitations to speak honestly. A boundary may still be enough. A direct conversation may reveal whether the other person can meet you with maturity. Distance should not become a shortcut for avoiding every difficult truth. But when honesty has been offered, when boundaries have been treated as obstacles, when the same cycle keeps returning, distance becomes less like avoidance and more like alignment. You are aligning your access with reality. The person may still matter. There may still be memories, affection, history, or gratitude. But closeness is not owed simply because something once mattered. Access has to be connected to what the present pattern can hold. If closeness keeps producing anxiety, bitterness, or self-abandonment, then reducing closeness may be the most honest thing left. This can feel sad without being wrong. That is important. A wise decision does not always feel victorious. Sometimes it feels like grief. You step back while still caring. You choose space while wishing the situation had made space unnecessary. You may even hope the other person grows, heals, or one day understands, but you stop making your peace depend on waiting near the wound. That is not coldness. Coldness tries not to feel. Healthy distance feels, but refuses to keep placing itself where feeling becomes injury. There is a difference between abandoning someone and refusing to abandon yourself. The mind may blur that difference when guilt appears. It may wonder whether you are being selfish, harsh, impatient, or unfair. But fairness does not require unlimited availability. Kindness does not mean staying close enough to be repeatedly hurt. Compassion does not cancel the need for proportion. Someone can deserve goodwill from a distance. Someone can be forgiven without being given the same access. A connection can be honored without being continued in the same form. These are mature distinctions, and they are often uncomfortable because they do not give the ego a dramatic enemy. It is easier to leave when anger is loud. It is harder to leave when you still understand them. But understanding is not a contract to remain available. A person's wounds may explain why they behave a certain way. They do not obligate you to keep living under the effect of that behavior. This is where the Stoic idea of self-command becomes practical. You are not only responsible for what you say in a moment of anger, you are also responsible for the conditions you keep placing yourself in. If a repeated environment keeps producing bitterness in you, wisdom asks whether remaining there is still virtuous, or whether distance would protect the character you are trying to preserve. That question is not easy. It requires honesty without drama. Maybe you notice that you are becoming someone you do not respect around them. More reactive, more suspicious, more eager to prove a point, less generous, less peaceful, less like the person you are when your heart is not constantly defending itself. That is information. Do not ignore it just because the other person is not obviously terrible. Sometimes the sign that distance is needed is not that they are evil. It is that you are becoming unwell in the pattern between you. A mature person pays attention to that. Not with panic, not with blame, with care. You can say to yourself quietly, "This closeness is costing me something I cannot keep losing." You may not need to announce it. You may not need to convince anyone. The first step may simply be a little more space, a slower response, a clearer boundary, less emotional exposure, fewer attempts to rescue the conversation from itself. Small distances can prevent large resentments, and that is often the wiser path. The world often glorifies endurance. Stay longer, try harder, forgive again, be the bigger person. Those things can be noble when the relationship is capable of repair, but endurance without discernment becomes self-erasure. Forgiveness without boundaries becomes permission. Staying too long in a harmful pattern can make you less loving, not more. A heart has to be protected if it is going to remain soft. That may be one of the most overlooked truths about detachment. The purpose is not to become untouchable. It is to protect the part of you that can still care without turning bitter. Distance, chosen early enough, can preserve tenderness. It keeps the wound from becoming identity. It gives anger less time to harden into a worldview. You are not stepping back because you hate them. You are stepping back because you do not want to hate what the pattern keeps doing to you. There is real wisdom in that sentence. It allows the distance to stay clean. You do not need to build a case against the person every day. You do not need to turn them into a monster to justify protecting your peace. The pattern has already given enough information. Your inner state has already given enough information. The cost has become visible. From there, the next step can be quiet. Not every separation needs a dramatic explanation. Sometimes the distance is gradual, respectful, and firm. You become less available to the old rhythm. You stop volunteering your energy where it keeps being mishandled. If a conversation is needed, you keep it clear. If it is not, you allow your conduct to change without turning the change into a spectacle. The aim is not to make them suffer your absence. The aim is to stop making yourself suffer your availability. That is the difference between revenge and freedom. Revenge still wants the other person to feel something. Freedom is more interested in what you are no longer willing to keep feeling. Revenge keeps measuring their reaction. Freedom measures the return of your own peace, and peace often returns in very ordinary ways. You stop bracing before every message. You no longer need to explain the same hurt again. The day feels less crowded by someone else's emotional weather. Your body begins to loosen because it is not constantly preparing for another disappointment. None of this may look dramatic from the outside, but inside it feels like room returning. That room matters. It is the space where resentment could have grown, but did not. The space where bitterness could have taken root, but was interrupted. The space where your heart can recover without being forced to harden in order to survive. This is why distance before resentment is not weakness. It is emotional stewardship. You are caring for what remains in you before it becomes distorted by staying too long. You are choosing to leave with clarity rather than waiting until anger becomes the only thing strong enough to carry you out. And once you understand this, distance becomes less frightening. It is no longer a sign that you failed to love. Sometimes it is the only way to keep love from turning into something darker. Sometimes it is the only way to protect respect, for them, for yourself, and for the part of your life that should not be consumed by a pattern that keeps asking for more than it gives. Still, even after you choose distance, the mind may look for one more thing, an explanation, a final answer, a clean reason that makes the whole story easier to put down. And that becomes the next rule, learning to release the need for final explanations. 6. Release the need for final explanations. After you create distance, the mind often asks for one more thing before it agrees to rest. An explanation, not just any explanation, but the one that finally makes everything feel clean. The answer that tells you why they changed, why they acted that way, why they did not understand you, why the pattern repeated, why the ending felt so unfinished. Part of you may believe that if you could just hear the truth in the right words, the pain would loosen. Sometimes that is true. A sincere conversation can help. A clear apology can soften a wound. There are moments when two honest people sit down, name what happened, take responsibility, and leave with more peace than they had before. That kind of explanation is not the problem. The problem begins when your peace becomes dependent on an explanation that may never come. You may keep waiting for a person to become clear who has only ever given you confusion. You may keep hoping for emotional maturity from someone who avoids responsibility whenever the conversation becomes difficult. The mind continues to imagine the perfect moment. They return, they understand, they admit what they did, they explain the silence, and suddenly the whole story becomes easier to carry. But life does not always give that scene. Some people leave you with fragments, a vague excuse, a cold ending, a half apology that avoids the real wound, a silence that forces you to build your own meaning around what they refused to say. You may never know whether they were afraid, selfish, confused, careless, ashamed, or simply not capable of meeting the situation with honesty. That uncertainty can feel cruel. Not because you need every detail, because the mind struggles to put down what it cannot name. An unclear ending keeps the door slightly open. It gives imagination room to keep working. Perhaps there was something you missed. Perhaps the story is different from what it looks like. Perhaps one more conversation would reveal the hidden truth that makes the pain finally understandable. This is how the need for explanation becomes another form of attachment. It keeps you emotionally near the person, even after you have stepped back. Your body may no longer be in the conversation, but your mind keeps waiting beside it. You replay what was said, what was not said, what they might have meant, what they could have been hiding. The search for clarity begins as healing, then slowly turns into a loop. There is a point where the search for an answer becomes more painful than the unanswered question itself. That is hard to admit, because wanting an explanation feels reasonable. You were affected. Something mattered. A situation changed you. Of course, the mind wants a reason. The need for meaning is human. No one wants to feel as though their pain came from nothing, or that another person could create confusion and simply walk away from the consequences. Still, the truth has to be faced gently. Some explanations will not be given by the person who owes them, and some explanations, even if given, will not heal what you hope they will heal. A person may explain themselves and still not satisfy the wound. They may offer a reason that feels too small for the pain it caused. They may apologize without fully understanding. Their version may protect their pride more than it honors your experience. You may finally hear the words and discover that they do not carry the peace you imagined. This is why closure cannot depend completely on another person's mouth. It has to become something you participate in. Epictetus constantly returned to the boundary between what belongs to you and what does not. Another person's willingness to explain belongs partly to them. Their honesty belongs to them. Their courage, memory, maturity, and ability to face discomfort are not things you can command. You can ask. You can offer a clear conversation. You can speak your part with dignity. After that, the response is no longer fully yours. What remains yours is the decision not to keep your life suspended until they become capable. That decision may feel unfair at first. It may feel as if you are being forced to clean up a mess you did not create alone. In some ways, that may be true. Emotional maturity often requires you to carry your own healing even when someone else helped create the wound. It is not fair, but it is freeing, because it returns power to the only place where power is still available, inside your own response. You may never receive the final explanation, but you can still understand enough to move wisely. The pattern itself is an explanation. Repeated avoidance explains something. A lack of accountability explains something. The way a person responds when you express pain explains something. Silence, when it keeps appearing where honesty is needed, is not empty. It may not give you every detail, but it gives you information about capacity. That information may be enough. Not emotionally satisfying, perhaps, but enough. Sometimes the mind rejects enough because it wants complete. It wants the whole story laid out in a way that leaves no loose threads. It wants the person who hurt you to become the person who helps you heal. That would be beautiful. It is not always available. A calmer form of wisdom begins when you stop confusing incomplete with unusable. You may not know every hidden reason, but you may know the effect. You may not know the full inner world of the other person, but you know how the pattern made you feel. Perhaps you cannot prove every intention, but you can observe the behavior clearly enough. A court of perfect certainty is not required for you to protect your peace. This is especially important if you tend to doubt yourself. You may keep asking for explanations because you do not trust your own perception yet. You want the other person to confirm that the pain was real, that the pattern happened, that your reaction was not unreasonable. But if they are invested in avoiding responsibility, they may never give you that confirmation. Waiting for it can quietly teach you to distrust yourself even more. At some point, your own clear seeing has to count. You were there. You felt the confusion. You noticed the repeated distance. You experienced the cost of their inconsistency, avoidance, or carelessness. Your body carried the tension. Your mind lived inside the uncertainty. An explanation from them might add detail, but it is not the only evidence that matters. Your experience is evidence too. That does not mean every feeling is automatically accurate. Feelings need examination, but once you have examined the pattern honestly, once you have separated reaction from reality as carefully as you can, you do not need to keep begging the source of your pain to validate the pain. There is a quiet humiliation in that, and you do not need to keep returning to it. The desire for a final explanation can also hide another desire, the desire for the ending to hurt less. If they explain it beautifully enough, maybe it will not feel like rejection. If they reveal that they were afraid, maybe the silence will feel less personal. If they admit they cared, perhaps the whole thing will seem less wasted. This is understandable, but an explanation cannot always rescue you from grief. Even the kindest truth may still leave you with loss. Even if they cared, They did not meet you in the way you needed. Even if they were afraid, you were still affected by their fear. A reason may soften the edges, but it does not always change the reality you must now live with. That reality is where healing has to begin. Not in the version where they finally say everything correctly. Here, with what you know. Here, with what happened. Here, with the pattern that has already shown enough to guide your next step. This is not about forcing yourself to stop caring. It is about no longer making someone else's clarity the condition for your own. You can still wish the ending had been more honest. You can still feel sadness about the questions left open. That sadness is part of being human. It does not mean you must keep waiting in the doorway. A doorway is not a home. You may stand there for a while, hoping someone comes back with the missing words. But eventually, if no one comes, life behind you continues asking for your attention. Your work, your body, your peace, your future, your relationship with yourself. All of it waits while your mind remains turned toward the person who has not given what you hoped. The longer you wait for final explanations, the more your life becomes organized around someone else's absence. That is too much authority to give silence. There is a gentler path. You begin creating closure from what is already available. Not a perfect closure, and not a dramatic one. Just enough truth to stop reopening the wound every day. Maybe the truth is that they could not communicate honestly. Maybe it is that you gave more than the connection could return. The lesson might be that you waited too long for clarity from someone who lived comfortably in ambiguity. These truths may not answer every question, but they can still return you to yourself. And returning to yourself is more important than solving every mystery. Some mysteries only become more expensive the longer you investigate them. You spend hours searching for motives when the behavior already gave direction. You look for a hidden story behind the distance, while the distance itself has been shaping your life. The mind keeps digging, hoping to find peace buried underneath one more interpretation. Peace is often found by putting the shovel down. Not because the ground contains nothing, because digging there has stopped helping you live. This does not mean you should reject every conversation if one becomes available. If someone returns with honesty and you feel stable enough to listen, you can choose whether that conversation is useful. Emotional freedom does not require stubbornness. It requires discernment. The important thing is that your healing does not depend on that conversation arriving. If it comes, you meet it from a steadier place. If it never comes, your life still moves. That is the difference between openness and captivity. Openness can receive truth if it appears. Captivity postpones peace until another person delivers it. You are not meant to live postponed. So the need for a final explanation has to soften, not disappear instantly. Just loosen enough that your next breath is no longer waiting for someone else's words. There may still be nights when the questions return. You may wonder what they truly felt, whether they regret anything, whether they ever understood the damage. Let the questions come without turning them into a project. Some questions are visitors. They do not need to become residents. A question can pass through the mind without being given the rest of the evening. That, too, is practice. When the old search begins again, you might gently bring yourself back to what is already known. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to understand that the pattern cost you peace. Enough to know that waiting for maturity from someone who avoids it will keep you tied to the same wound. Enough to choose distance without needing a perfect final sentence from them. This is not defeat. It is a sober kind of freedom. You stop asking the person who confused you to become the only source of clarity. You stop demanding that the ending become elegant before you let it be over. You stop treating unanswered questions as proof that your life must remain unfinished. Some endings stay messy. Your peace does not have to. And once you release the need for final explanations, another part of the work becomes visible. Even without their answers, your own mind may continue replaying the pain. The next freedom is learning not to reopen the wound from the inside. 7. Stop reopening the wound in your mind. Even when the conversation ends, the mind can keep it alive. That is one of the hardest parts of detachment. You may stop texting, you may stop explaining, you may create distance, accept that no final explanation is coming, and still find yourself returning to the same inner place again and again. The person is not in the room, but the wound is. The situation is no longer happening outside you, yet something inside keeps replaying it, as if one more review will finally make it painless. This is not weakness. It is what the mind often does when something feels unfinished. It goes back to the moment you were hurt. It studies the words. It replays the silence. It imagines what you should have said, what they should have understood, what might have happened if you had been colder, warmer, clearer, less available, more guarded, more honest from the beginning. At first, replaying can feel useful. You may believe you are trying to learn, and sometimes you are. Reflection has value. It helps you notice patterns, understand your own choices, and see where you ignored signs that deserved more respect. A life without reflection becomes careless. Stoicism never asks you to avoid examining yourself. But there is a point where reflection quietly becomes self-injury. You are no longer learning from the wound. You are touching it to see if it still hurts. And, of course, it does. The mind may disguise this as problem-solving, but the body knows the difference. Real reflection leaves you a little clearer, even if it is uncomfortable. Rumination leaves you more exhausted, more restless, and more tied to the same person. It gives you the feeling of movement while keeping you in the same room. That is why this rule matters. Stop reopening the wound in your mind, not because the pain was not real, not because you should be over it by now. Healing does not work on command, and a serious wound does not close just because you understand it intellectually. The point is not to shame yourself for remembering. The point is to notice when remembering has become another form of remaining. There is a difference between a memory visiting you and you building a life around the memory. The first is natural. The second slowly becomes a prison. A thought comes, and before you know it, you are back inside the old conversation. You answer them in your head. You explain yourself better this time. You imagine them finally understanding, or regretting, or revealing what they never said. For a few minutes, the mind feels active. Afterward, nothing has healed. You are only tired. This is the quiet cost of mental replay. It keeps asking for your attention without giving you peace in return. It takes energy from the present and spends it on a scene that cannot be edited. It makes the wound feel current, even when life is trying to carry you forward. A painful event may have happened once. The mind can make it happen hundreds of times. That does not mean the original pain was your fault. It means your relationship with the pain has become part of the healing. Someone may have injured you, confused you, abandoned you, or treated you without care. That part belongs to the past. What happens inside you every day afterward becomes the place where your freedom is either rebuilt or delayed. This is where Stoicism becomes very personal. The Stoics paid close attention to impressions, the first images, thoughts, and interpretations that rise in the mind. They understood that not every impression deserves full belief. A thought may appear with force, but force is not the same as truth. A memory may return with pain, but pain is not proof that you must follow it all the way down. You can notice the thought without obeying its direction. That sounds simple until you try it. The mind pulls you back with strong arguments. It tells you there is still something to solve. It suggests that if you think about it one more time, you will finally understand. It brings up a detail you missed, then another, then another. Soon, the whole emotional machinery is running again, and the wound gets fresh air. This is why the first act of freedom is not to erase the memory. It is to stop feeding the loop. You may not control the first appearance of the thought. Sometimes a place, a song, a time of day, or a small detail brings everything back without permission. That is human. But once the thought appears, there is a second moment, quieter and more important, where you decide whether to enter the whole story again. That second moment is where training begins. You can say to yourself gently, "I know this place. I have been here before." Not with anger toward yourself, not with panic, just recognition. The mind is opening the old room again, and you do not have to walk inside every time the door appears. There is dignity in that small refusal. You are not denying the wound. You are refusing to keep using your imagination as a place where the wound stays alive. Many people do not realize how much pain is extended by imagined conversations. The real relationship may be over, but the inner relationship continues. You still debate them. You still defend yourself. You still wait for them to respond correctly in a scene that exists only in your mind. The strange thing is that this can feel comforting. At least inside the replay, they are still near. Even if the nearness hurts, it gives the attachment something to hold. The mind would rather suffer around a familiar person than face the emptiness that comes when the connection truly loses its center. So it keeps the story active. It keeps returning to the pain, because the pain has become the last form of contact. That is a difficult truth, but it explains a lot. Sometimes you are not replaying because you want to suffer. You are replaying because part of you is afraid of what silence will feel like when the story finally stops. When there is no more argument to rehearse, no message to draft, no explanation to seek, no imaginary scene where they come back with the right words, you are left with yourself, with the life that was waiting under the noise, with the grief that cannot be negotiated away, with the simple fact that something mattered, and now it must be released without a perfect ending. That emptiness can feel frightening, but it is also where healing begins to become real. As long as the mind keeps replaying, it avoids the deeper grief. Replaying gives pain a task. Grief has no task at first. It only asks to be felt, accepted, and slowly integrated. That is why people often prefer rumination to sadness. Rumination feels active. Sadness feels exposed. But sadness, when faced honestly, can move. Rumination circles. This is a difference worth remembering. If a thought returns and leaves you softer, clearer, or more honest, it may be grief doing its work. If it returns and leaves you tense, angry, desperate, or stuck in the same inner debate, it may be the wound asking to be reopened. The two can feel similar at first, but their effects are different. One helps the heart digest what happened, the other keeps feeding it the same sharp piece. So when the replay begins, the question is not, "Why am I still thinking about this?" That question can turn into self-attack. A better question is this thought helping me heal, or is it keeping me attached? That question is calm. It does not shame you. It simply asks whether the mind is serving your freedom or serving the old pattern. If the thought is helping, stay with it carefully. Learn what it has to teach. Maybe you need to admit where you ignored yourself. Maybe there is a boundary you should have set earlier. Perhaps the memory is showing you a pattern you never want to repeat. That kind of reflection can be painful, but it gives something back. If the thought is only replaying the injury, you are allowed to step away from it. Not dramatically, not by forcing the mind to become blank, just by redirecting your attention towards something real and present. Your breath, your body, the room you are in, the work in front of you. A small action that belongs to today instead of yesterday. This is not avoidance. Avoidance refuses to learn. Redirection happens after the lesson has already been received. There is a point where continuing to think is no longer wisdom. It is a habit. The mind has worn a path through the same emotional field, and because the path is familiar, it keeps walking there. Healing means creating another path slowly. Not once, not perfectly, but each time you refuse to give the old story the whole room. At first, it may feel like nothing is changing. You catch the thought, redirect, then 10 minutes later it comes back. That does not mean you failed. It means the mind is used to returning there. A pattern that was repeated many times will not disappear because you interrupted it once. But every interruption matters. It teaches the mind that the old route is no longer the only route. This is how freedom becomes practical. Small returns, again and again. A thought appears and you come back. The memory pulls and you come back. The imaginary conversation begins and you notice it before it becomes an hour. You do not need to punish yourself for entering it. You simply leave when you become aware. That gentle leaving is part of the discipline. It is similar to what happens in meditation or prayer. The mind wanders, and the work is not to hate the wandering. The work is to return. The return is the practice. Each return strengthens the part of you that is no longer willing to be dragged by every inner image. Over time, the wound receives less attention, not because you denied it, because you stopped making it the center of your inner life. There will still be days when it returns strongly. Healing is not a straight line. A memory can come back after weeks of quiet and feel strangely alive. Do not turn that into a story that you are back at the beginning. You are not. A wave is not the ocean. A difficult evening is not proof that nothing changed. The old pain may visit, but it does not have to move back in. This distinction protects you from despair. Many people lose hope because they think healing means never remembering. Then, when the memory returns, they assume they are still trapped. But remembering is not the same as being controlled. Feeling the ache is not the same as reopening the wound. You can have a tender place inside you without letting it organize your whole life. That is maturity, not numbness. A mature heart can say, "This still hurts sometimes," without making the hurt a command. It can feel the old sadness without reaching for the old pattern. It can remember someone without returning to them mentally for the rest of the day. That is the kind of freedom worth building, and it requires honesty about what you consume mentally. If you keep checking their page, rereading old messages, revisiting photos, or exposing yourself to details that pull the wound open, then the mind is not healing in neutral conditions. It is being asked to recover while being shown the knife again. That is not fair to you. You do not have to turn healing into surveillance. Sometimes people call it curiosity, but the body knows when curiosity is really attachment looking for a reason to hurt again. You check, then you feel disturbed. You read, then you feel pulled back. You see one small detail, and the mind builds an entire story around it. The wound reopens, and you call it information. But not all information is useful. Some information only feeds the part of you that has not accepted the ending yet. This is where self-respect becomes very ordinary. It may look like not checking, not rereading, not asking about them through other people, not placing yourself in the path of unnecessary reminders when the wound is still raw. These are not grand gestures, they are quiet protections, and quiet protections are often what healing is made of. You are not weak because certain things still affect you. You are wise when you stop pretending you can keep touching them without consequence. A person recovering from a physical wound does not keep pressing on it to test whether it has healed. Emotional wounds deserve the same basic respect. Give them conditions in which closing is possible. That means your mind needs somewhere else to go. Not merely away from the pain, but toward a life that is strong enough to hold your attention. Work that matters, routines that steady you, people who do not make you audition for peace. Physical movement, prayer, learning, sleep, food, small responsibilities that remind you your life is larger than this wound. The present has to become more inhabited than the past. Otherwise, the mind will keep returning to the most emotionally charged place it knows. This is not about replacing one attachment with another. It is about rebuilding contact with reality. Pain often makes the world feel narrow. One person, one story, one unanswered question, one wound. Healing widens the room again. It brings back the rest of your life piece by piece. At first, those pieces may seem small, still they matter. A clean morning, a completed task, a conversation with someone safe, a walk where your mind is not entirely owned by what happened, a moment where you realize you have gone longer than usual without replaying the same scene. These are not minor victories. They are evidence that your attention is returning, and attention is life. What you repeatedly give attention to becomes powerful inside you. If you keep feeding the old wound with thought, imagination, surveillance, and rehearsal, it remains strong. If you begin feeding your present life with care, structure, and patience, something else begins to grow, not instantly, but reliably. This is why the rule is not simply stop thinking about it. That would be too shallow and, honestly, not very kind. The deeper rule is this: stop turning the wound into a place you visit for identity, contact, or control. Learn from it. Grieve it. Then, when the lesson has been taken, stop reopening it as if more pain will produce more wisdom. Sometimes the wisest thing is to let the wound close without checking every hour whether it still belongs to you. That kind of letting go can feel strange. A part of you may wonder who you are without the story. If you are no longer the person explaining what happened, defending yourself, replaying the hurt, or waiting for the missing answer, then what remains? You remain, not the version organized around the wound, the version that was underneath it. And that version needs your attention now. This is where the next rule begins naturally. Once you stop reopening the wound in your mind, your energy becomes available again. The question then is not only how to stop thinking about them, but where to place the life that has been returned to you. That is why the next step is to return to what is yours to control. 8. Return your energy to what is yours to control. When you stop reopening the wound in your mind, something strange can happen. You may feel emptier at first, not peaceful immediately, not fully free, just unsure where all that mental energy should go now. For a long time, your attention may have been organized around the same person, the same story, the same question, the same ache. Even pain can become a routine when the mind visits it often enough. So when you begin to step away from it, there may be a silence inside you that feels unfamiliar. That silence is not failure. It is space returning. And space at first can feel uncomfortable because it asks you a question you may not be ready for. Now that your attention is no longer being spent there, where will you place it? This is where detachment becomes more than withdrawal. It becomes redirection. Because emotional freedom is not only about removing your energy from what hurts you, it is also about returning that energy to what can actually be shaped by your hands. If you only detach from the person, but do not return to your own life, the mind may slowly drift back to the old place. Not because the place is good for you, but because it is familiar. A wound can become familiar. A pattern can become familiar. Even anxiety can feel like home if you have lived inside it long enough. That is why the next rule matters. Return your energy to what is yours to control. This sounds simple, almost too simple. But when emotion is involved, simple truths become difficult to practice. You may already know that you cannot control whether someone understands you, regrets losing you, apologizes properly, changes their pattern, tells the truth, or remembers you with fairness. You know this in theory, but the heart may still keep trying. It tries through imagination, through checking, through rehearsing, through waiting, through small emotional bargains with reality. Maybe if you stay calm enough, they will understand. Maybe if you explain better, they will change. Maybe if you disappear perfectly, they will feel your absence in the way you hoped. That is not control. It is longing dressed as strategy. And the danger is that longing can consume your life while pretending to guide it. Epictetus built much of his teaching around this painful distinction. Some things belong to us, and some things do not. The idea is familiar, but it becomes sharp when you apply it to someone you care about. Their maturity does not belong to you. Their honesty does not belong to you. Their ability to recognize your value does not belong to you. Their story about why things happened does not fully belong to you. What belongs to you is closer. Your attention, your conduct, your next choice, the way you speak when you are hurt, the boundary you keep after you have seen enough, the habits you return to when your mind wants to wander back into old pain. These are not small things. They are the ground of your life. And that ground needs you back. When someone has disturbed you deeply, your energy often becomes scattered. Part of it remains in the past, reviewing what happened. Another part reaches toward the future, imagining what they might do next. Some of it watches their silence, their mood, their distance, their possible regret. What remains for your actual life can become very little. You may still be moving through the day, but not fully inhabiting it. The body is present. The attention is elsewhere. This is one of the quietest costs of attachment. It does not always destroy your life in obvious ways. Sometimes it simply drains your ability to be fully where you are. Food tastes dull. Work feels heavier. Conversations with good people receive only half of you. The morning begins, and before anything has happened, the mind is already checking the old wound like a weather report. That is not how your life is meant to be lived. Not because you should be harsh with yourself for feeling pain, but because your attention is too valuable to remain endlessly assigned to what you cannot govern. Attention is not just a mental habit. It is a form of life. What you give attention to receives your inner strength. What you return to again and again becomes larger inside you. If you keep placing your energy on someone's silence, their silence grows. If you keep placing it on their opinion grows. If you keep placing it on the question of whether they will ever understand, that question becomes a kind of invisible authority over your day. The way out is not to pretend you no longer care. The way out is to begin caring more deliberately. Care about what can be built from here. Care about the person you become after the wound. Care about the small decisions that return your self-respect. Care about the condition of your body, the order of your room, the quality of your work, the people who are still present, the promises you made to yourself before this situation consumed so much space. This is not a distraction. It is a return. There is a difference between numbing yourself and returning to responsibility. Numbing says, I do not want to feel this. Responsibility says, I feel this, but my life still needs my presence. One escapes the wound. The other refuses to let the wound become the whole world. That distinction matters because some people misunderstand healing. They think moving on means acting untouched. They rush into noise, work, pleasure, conversation, or another attachment just to avoid the emptiness. For a while, it may help, but if the energy is not truly returned to the self, the old pain remains waiting underneath. A real return is quieter. It may look ordinary from the outside. You wake up and make the bed, not because making the bed fixes heartbreak, but because order in one small corner teaches the mind that life is still responsive to your effort. You eat properly. You answer the message from the friend who has been patient with you. You go for the walk, even though part of you wants to stay in the loop. You finish the work that has been waiting. None of this is dramatic. That is why it works. The wound often wants drama. It wants a grand solution, a final answer, a powerful emotional turning point. But most healing happens through repeated, ordinary returns. Again and again, you bring your energy back from what cannot be controlled and place it into what can be practiced. A clean response, a protected boundary, a steady routine, a body that is not neglected just because the heart is tired. This is how you teach yourself that your life is not overpowered by one person's presence or absence. At first, it may feel mechanical. You may return to your routine and still think of them. You may work for an hour and still feel the ache in the background. You may pray, walk, study, train, clean, or sit quietly, and the mind may still drift back. That does not mean the return is useless. It means the return is training. Every time you bring your attention back, you are weakening the old ownership. The person may still appear in your thoughts, but they are no longer allowed to take the whole room every time they arrive. The pain may still visit, but it does not automatically cancel the rest of the day. This is a serious shift. Freedom rarely begins as a feeling. More often, it begins as a choice you repeat before the feeling catches up. You choose not to check. You choose not to reopen the old conversation. You choose not to spend the morning building imaginary defenses. You choose to place 1 hour into something that belongs to your future rather than something that belongs to the wound. Slowly, the emotional system begins to learn. This person is not the center anymore. This story is not the only story. This pain is real, but it is not the ruler. That learning takes time. It should. Anything that once held deep emotional authority will not lose it because you made one clear decision. The mind may need proof, and proof comes through repetition, not promises, not declarations. Repetition. You return to what is yours today, then tomorrow. Then again when the old feeling comes back. That is where self-command becomes visible to you, even if no one else notices. And there is something quietly powerful about that. You begin to trust yourself again, not because you never feel weak, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself every time the wound calls. You may still have difficult evenings, but you also have evidence that you can come back. You can lose balance and return. You can feel the pull and not obey it completely. This kind of trust is better than the temporary satisfaction of being understood by someone else. It is slower but more stable. Much of emotional pain becomes worse because you start waiting for another person to give you the feeling that you are allowed to live again. Their apology would allow you to relax. Their regret would allow you to feel valued. Their explanation would allow you to stop questioning yourself. Their return would allow you to feel chosen. But when your life waits for those things, you are not free. You are paused, and you are not made to live paused. This does not mean you deny the value of apology, repair, or honest conversation. Those things matter. If they come sincerely, they can be received with maturity. But your life cannot remain frozen until another person becomes capable of giving them. Some people grow late. Some never grow in the way you hoped. Some understand only after you have already lost too much by waiting. Your responsibility is to stop losing yourself in the waiting. There is a moment when you have to admit, gently, I may not receive what I wanted from them, but I can still give myself what is needed from me. That is not a small sentence. It changes the direction of power. Instead of asking, will they finally give me peace? You begin asking, what would peace require from me today? The first question keeps you facing their door. The second turns you back toward your own life. And your own life has been waiting without complaint. Your body has been waiting for care. Your work has been waiting for focus. Your inner discipline has been waiting for practice. Your future has been waiting for attention. The people who love you in steadier ways may have been waiting for you to return from a place they could not enter with you. This is not meant to make you feel guilty. It is meant to remind you that pain can narrow your world, but it does not have to keep it narrow forever. The world is still larger than the person who hurt you. Your life is still larger than the story that confused you. A future version of you is still being shaped by what you repeatedly choose now. That future self deserves more than the leftovers of your attention. So you begin with what is close. Not the entire life plan, not a dramatic transformation, just the next controllable act. Clean the space around you, move your body, finish one task. Write down the lesson without turning it into another wound. Speak to yourself without cruelty. Keep the boundary for one more day. Refuse one unnecessary check. Return one piece of attention to something that can actually grow. A life is rebuilt through pieces. The mind may resist this because it wants something grand enough to match the pain, but the soul often heals through humble actions. Small choices restore a sense of agency. They remind you that even if you could not control what happened, and even if you cannot control how someone else behaves now, you are not powerless inside your own life. That reminder has to become physical. It has to be lived. Thought alone is not enough here. You can understand the dichotomy of control perfectly and still spend the evening watching someone's absence. The body must learn through action that your energy has somewhere else to go. When you walk, clean, work, pray, train, create, study, or rest properly, you are not merely passing time. You are teaching your nervous system that life continues through your participation. That is why routines matter during detachment. They are not boring details. They are rails for a mind that might otherwise return to the old spiral. A routine gives the day a structure that pain did not design. It gives your attention a place to land. It reduces the number of empty spaces where the wound can expand. You do not need to become rigid. You only need enough structure to remind yourself that your life has form beyond this emotional situation. There will be resistance. Part of you may feel that returning to normal life means the pain did not matter. This is a common misunderstanding. The mind may think, if I stop thinking about it, am I pretending it was nothing? But healing is not betrayal. Peace does not insult the wound. Moving forward does not erase what happened. It simply means the wound no longer receives unlimited authority. You can honor what hurt you without living permanently around it. You can carry the lesson without carrying the entire emotional weight every day. That is a kinder arrangement with the past. Another form of control is the way you speak to yourself during the return. If the inner voice becomes harsh, healing becomes harder. You may call yourself foolish for caring, weak for missing them, stupid for not leaving earlier, dramatic for still feeling affected. That voice may pretend to be discipline, but it is often just pain turning inward. You do not need that kind of cruelty. Self-command is not self-contempt. A steadier voice would be more honest. It can admit, I stayed too long, without saying, I am worthless. It can recognize, "I ignored signs," without turning the lesson into punishment. It can say, "I am still healing," without making that sentence an identity. The way you treat yourself after disappointment determines whether the wound becomes wisdom or shame. Choose wisdom where you can, and when you fail, return again. That is another thing within your control, the return after the lapse. You may check once. You may replay the conversation again. You may answer from emotion when you meant to wait. None of that means the whole process is ruined. A lapse is not a life sentence. The important thing is whether you use it as proof that you are powerless or as information about where the practice needs more care. A Stoic does not require perfection before beginning again. He returns because returning is the discipline. There is a quiet generosity in allowing yourself to begin again without drama. You notice the slip, learn from it, and come back to what is yours. No performance, no self-attack, just another honest return. Over time, your energy becomes less scattered. You start feeling the difference between attention that drains you and attention that strengthens you. The old story may still have emotional weight, but it no longer receives the first and best part of your day. You may still remember, but you also build. You may still feel, but you also act. You may still miss, but you no longer let missing decide everything. This is the shape of recovery, not forgetting. Reclaiming. You reclaim your mornings from waiting. You reclaim your body from tension. You reclaim your work from distraction. You reclaim your future from the belief that one person's failure to love, explain, respect, or understand you has the right to define what comes next. That belief has to be challenged gently but firmly. No one should have that much power over the rest of your life. Someone may have affected you deeply. They may have changed the way you see certain things. They may have left you with lessons you did not ask for, but they do not get to decide whether you become whole again. That part is not theirs. It is yours. And because it is yours, it will often look less dramatic than the pain. It will look like showing up, like choosing steadiness, like refusing to live in constant reaction, like doing the small thing that protects your mind, even when the emotional part of you wants to return to the old fire. This is not glamorous work, it is real work. The kind that slowly makes you less available to chaos. And eventually, you begin to notice something important. The person may still exist in the world, but they no longer occupy the center of yours. Their mood does not decide your mood so easily. Their silence does not feel like an emergency. Their opinion does not become a command. Their absence no longer empties the whole room. You have returned to yourself. Not completely, perhaps, but enough to feel the direction changing. That is what this rule is really about. Returning your energy to what is yours to control is not a technique for becoming cold. It is a way of becoming present again. Present to your own life, present to your own character, present to the future that needs your attention more than the old wound needs another hour. And once your energy begins to return, the final rule becomes possible. You are no longer only trying to detach from someone. You are ready to build a life they cannot disturb. 9. Build a life they cannot disturb. After you return your energy to what is yours to control, the work becomes larger than detaching from one person. Because if you only remove someone from the center, but do not build anything strong in that center, the mind may leave the space open for them to return. Not always in reality, sometimes only in thought. A memory returns, a message appears, a silence stretches longer than expected, and suddenly the old disturbance begins again. This is why the final rule matters. Build a life they cannot disturb. Not a life where you feel nothing, not a life where no one matters. That would not be freedom, that would be emotional exile. A life they cannot disturb is not empty or cold. It is simply a life that has become too rooted to be overturned by one person's attention, absence, opinion, or regret. That kind of life is not built in one dramatic moment. It is built slowly, through the things that seem almost too ordinary to be powerful. The way you begin your morning, the way you keep your promises to yourself, the people you allow close to your private world, the work you give your mind to, the habits that steady your body, the values you return to when emotions become loud. These things may not feel as intense as pain, but they are stronger than pain when they are practiced long enough. Pain can shake you. Structure can hold you. That is something many people discover late. They spend so much energy trying to stop thinking about someone that they forget to create a life worth returning to. The whole focus becomes escape. Do not text. Do not check. Do not replay. Do not react. Those disciplines are useful, but they are not the whole path. A person cannot live forever around what must be avoided. At some point, the soul needs something to move toward. That is where building begins. A life they cannot disturb is a life with weight in more than one place. It has work that matters to you, even if no one claps for it. It has routines that are not dependent on your mood. It has friendships where you do not have to audition for basic care. It has quiet moments where solitude does not feel like punishment. It has a relationship with yourself that does not collapse every time someone else misunderstands you. This is not about becoming untouchable. It is about becoming less easily displaced. When one person has too much authority over your inner world, every small movement from them feels enormous. A reply can lift you. A delay can ruin you. Their warmth can make the day feel meaningful, and their distance can make the same day feel empty. That is not love at its healthiest. That is emotional centralization. Too much of your life has been gathered in one place, so when that place shakes, everything shakes. Building a life they cannot disturb means spreading your life back into its rightful places. Your peace returns to your habits. Your confidence returns to your actions. Your sense of worth returns to your character. Your attention returns to your future. No single person should be able to walk in or out and take the whole atmosphere with them. This takes honesty, because part of you may not want a larger life at first. A larger life means the old person becomes smaller inside it. And even if that is what you need, it can feel like another loss. The attachment may resist being reduced. It may prefer the intensity, even when the intensity hurts, because intensity feels like proof that something mattered. But peace is allowed to be quieter than intensity. A relationship can matter deeply and still not deserve to remain the organizing force of your life. A wound can be real and still not deserve the first seat in your mind. Someone can have shaped a chapter without being given the right to shape the whole book. That is the shift. You are not erasing them. You are right-sizing them. The Stoics cared deeply about this kind of proportion. They did not teach people to live without feeling. They taught them to stop handing the highest authority of the soul to unstable things. Other people, outcomes, praise, rejection, misunderstanding, status, loss, all of these can touch life. Some of them can hurt badly, but none of them should become the ruler of the inner person. Your life needs a stronger center than someone else's behavior. That center is not ego. It is character. Ego asks, how do I appear? Character asks, how am I living? Ego wants the other person to see your growth. Character keeps growing when no one sees it. Ego builds a life to prove something. Character builds a life because the soul needs order, dignity, and purpose, whether anyone is watching or not. This distinction is important especially after emotional pain. It is tempting to build a life as a message. You may want to become happier, so they regret leaving; more successful, so they feel small; more attractive, so they notice what they lost; more distant, so they feel your absence. At first, that kind of motivation can feel strong, but it still keeps them secretly involved. They remain the audience. And if they are the audience, they still own part of the stage. A life they cannot disturb is not built for them to witness. It is built because you are finally tired of living as a reaction. You do not heal to prove them wrong. You heal because staying wounded keeps costing you too much. You do not become disciplined so they feel regret. You become disciplined because your future deserves a steadier version of you. That future has nothing to do with their applause. This is where silence becomes clean again. You are not posting your peace at them. You are not arranging your growth in a way that waits to be noticed. You are not turning your recovery into a performance for the person who hurt you. The work happens closer than that, in the room where you keep promises to yourself, in the choices no one sees, in the mornings when you do not feel strong but still act with care. That private consistency is what changes you, not the dramatic declaration, not the perfect ending, not the moment they finally realize your value. The life you build after them becomes proof to yourself that your value was never waiting for their realization. At first, this may feel difficult because pain often damages trust in your own life. You may wonder whether you can feel steady again, whether ordinary things will ever have color again, whether you will always carry this strange sensitivity around anything that reminds you of them. These thoughts can appear after a deep emotional disturbance. They do not mean the future is broken. They mean the nervous system needs evidence of safety, repetition, and time. You give it evidence by living, not just thinking, living. Eating well when the heart has no appetite. Sleeping as if your body still deserves care. Moving even when the mind wants to stay heavy. Returning to work, not as escape, but as participation in your own future. Spending time with people whose presence does not require you to become smaller. This is how the life begins to widen. One ordinary act at a time. There will be days when the old disturbance still reaches you. A memory may interrupt a good morning. Their name may appear somewhere. A place, a phrase, a song, or a season may open something you thought had closed. A life they cannot disturb does not mean those moments never happen. It means they no longer take over the entire system. You may feel the sting, but the day does not have to belong to it. You may pause, breathe, remember, and continue. Not because you are numb, because your life now has enough structure, meaning, and self-possession to absorb the wave without becoming the wave. That is real strength. Quiet, almost invisible, but real. A person who has built inner stability is not impossible to hurt. They are simply harder to uproot. Their peace has more than one support. If one part aches, the whole life does not collapse. Their identity is not balanced on someone else's attention. Their worth is not waiting in another person's apology. Their future is not frozen by a story that refused to end beautifully. This is the kind of freedom worth wanting. Not the cold freedom of someone who never cares. The steady freedom of someone who cares, feels, grieves, learns, and still continues to belong to himself. That word matters. Belong. Much of attachment becomes painful because you stop belonging fully to yourself. Your thoughts belong to their silence. Your mood belongs to their tone. Your confidence belongs to their approval. Your sense of closure belongs to their explanation. Little by little, your own inner world becomes rented out to someone who may not even know how much space they occupy. Building a life they cannot disturb is the process of taking that space back, gently, but seriously. You take back your mornings by not handing the first hour to old thoughts. You take back your body by caring for it, even when the emotional part of you feels tired. You take back your work by giving it your full attention for one honest block of time. You take back your dignity by no longer negotiating with patterns that have already shown enough. These are not glamorous victories, but they are real. And real victories are often quieter than the pain that made them necessary. There is also a social part to this. A life they cannot disturb cannot be built entirely in isolation. Solitude is important, especially when you need to hear yourself again, but isolation can make the wound louder. If the only relationship left in your mind is the one that hurt you, that person will feel larger than they are. You need contact with healthier reality, people who speak plainly, people who do not make care feel like a puzzle, people whose presence reminds your nervous system that connection does not always have to be confusing. Not perfect people, just steadier ones. The kind who help your heart remember that peace in relationship is possible. This matters because pain can distort your expectations. After being hurt, you may start believing that closeness always becomes a trap, that care always turns into disappointment, that openness is foolish. That is not wisdom. That is injury trying to become philosophy. Be careful there. A wound can sound very intelligent when it is protecting itself. It may tell you never to trust again, never to need anyone, never to be soft, never to explain, never to care deeply. Those statements may feel powerful for a while, but they are often fear dressed as strength. They protect you from one kind of pain by creating another kind of loneliness. The aim is not to become unreachable. The aim is to become discerning. You can let people close without giving them authority over your whole inner climate. You can love without abandoning proportion. You can be warm without being endlessly available. You can forgive without handing someone the same access. You can hope without building your peace on another person's potential. This is the mature life, open but not unguarded, kind but not self-erasing, soft but not easily ruled. When you build from that place, the old person loses power naturally, not because you hate them, not because you have forced yourself to forget, because there is less empty space for them to occupy. Your life becomes full in the right way, full of responsibility, meaning, discipline, relationships, quiet joys, and inner commitments that do not depend on their return. The disturbance has fewer places to land. This is why purpose matters so much. Without purpose, pain becomes a purpose. The mind needs something to organize around. If you do not give it a worthy direction, it may organize itself around the wound, the person, the question, the regret. Purpose gives attention a higher task. That purpose does not have to be grand at first. It may begin as becoming healthier, becoming more honest, becoming someone who does not abandon himself under emotional pressure. It may be building a skill, serving your family, deepening your faith, creating work that matters, becoming physically stronger, or learning how to live with more order. The form can differ. The principle is the same. Your life needs a direction stronger than the pull of the past. And when you have direction, detachment stops feeling like emptiness. It begins to feel like movement. You are not merely away from someone. You are on the way back to something. Back to your own standards. Back to your own future. Back to the person you were before the confusion, and also toward the person the confusion is teaching you to become. This is where the pain can be transformed without being romanticized. You do not have to pretend the wound was a gift. Some things are simply painful. Some people mishandle what was offered to them. Some endings are messy, unfair, and disappointing. Stoicism does not require you to call harm beautiful, but it does ask what you will do with what remains. Will you let the wound make your world smaller, or will you build a life wide enough that the wound is no longer the center? Will you keep measuring your worth by what someone failed to see, or will you practice a worth that does not require their recognition? Will you stay loyal to the old disturbance, or will you become loyal to the life that is still asking to be lived? These questions are not meant to pressure you. They are meant to return you to agency, because the deepest loss is not always the person. Sometimes it is the version of yourself you stop caring for while you are consumed by them. The abandoned routines, the neglected body, the delayed work, the friendships you answered with half attention, the inner voice that became harsh because you were angry at yourself for caring. Building your life is how you apologize to yourself, not with shame, with repair. You repair by becoming present again. You repair by keeping small promises. You repair by no longer using the wound as proof that your life must remain disordered. You repair by choosing surroundings, habits, and relationships that support the person you are trying to become. Slowly, your inner world becomes harder to invade. Their silence does not echo as loudly because your day already has shape. Their opinion does not weigh as much because your conscience has become clearer. Their absence does not empty the room because the room is no longer built around them. Their return, if it ever happens, does not instantly erase your standards because your standards have been practiced in their absence. That is when you know something has changed, not because you feel nothing, because you no longer lose yourself when you feel something. This is the difference between suppression and freedom. Suppression tries to bury the feeling. Freedom allows the feeling to rise without surrendering the throne to it. Suppression wants to look unaffected. Freedom is not interested in looking unaffected. It is interested in remaining governed from within. That is the heart of this entire path. Detach in silence. Control the first reaction. Accept people as their patterns reveal them. Release their opinion, their explanations, and the old mental replay. Return your energy to what belongs to you. Then build so much life, character, and inner order that one person's behavior no longer has the power to unmake you. This does not happen overnight, and it does not have to. A life that cannot be easily disturbed is built the same way it is protected, quietly, repeatedly, and with more honesty than drama. Some days you will feel strong. Other days, the old ache will return. The work is not to become perfect. The work is to keep returning to yourself with enough patience that, over time, returning becomes your nature. One day you may notice the change in a very ordinary moment. You hear their name and your body does not tighten the same way. You remember what happened, but the memory does not pull you under. You see that life has continued in directions you once could not imagine. The wound is not erased, but it is no longer in charge. That moment may not look dramatic from the outside. Inside it is freedom, because they can still exist, and you can still be whole. They can misunderstand, and you can still stand. They can remain silent, and your life can still speak through the way you live it. That is emotional freedom. Not the need to prove you are detached, not the performance of being above pain, not the cold pride of someone who refuses to feel. It is the quiet strength of a person who has stopped giving away the command of his inner life. And maybe this is where the whole lesson ends. You do not detach in silence because you want to disappear. You detach in silence because your peace no longer needs to argue for its right to exist. You stop chasing the explanation that never comes. You stop reopening the wound as if pain will eventually pay you back. You stop arranging your life around the opinion of someone who could not meet you clearly. Little by little, you become less available to the old chaos and more available to your own future. That future may begin softly, with one calmer morning, one cleaner boundary, one message not sent from pain, 1 hour of attention returned to your own life. Do not underestimate these small returns. They are how a person becomes free without needing to announce freedom. They are how silence becomes strength instead of waiting. They are how detachment becomes not an escape from love, but a return to self-respect. And when that return becomes steady enough, you finally understand the meaning of building a life they cannot disturb. It does not mean they never cross your mind. It means they no longer control what happens there. It means your peace has found a deeper home inside you. Conclusion. If you have listened this far, maybe you already understand that detachment is not as simple as walking away. Walking away can happen in a moment. Detachment takes longer because it asks for something deeper than distance. It asks you to take back the parts of yourself that were still waiting, still explaining, still reacting, still hoping someone else would become clear enough for you to feel free. That is not easy, especially when the person mattered. It is much easier to pretend you do not care than to admit that you cared deeply and still choose peace. It is easier to become cold than to remain honest. Easier to turn someone into an enemy than to accept that they may be human, wounded, limited, and still not safe for your inner life. But emotional freedom is not built on pretending. It is built on seeing. Seeing where your attention has been living, seeing how quickly pain tries to speak for you, seeing the difference between someone's words and their repeated pattern, seeing how much of your peace has been tied to their opinion, their explanation, their apology, their silence, or their return. And once you see that clearly, something inside you cannot stay asleep in the same way. You may still feel attached, you may still miss them, you may still have moments when the old wound pulls at your mind and asks for another hour of attention. That does not mean you have failed. It only means the part of you that was connected is learning how to loosen without tearing itself apart. Be patient with that process. A calm heart is not built by force. It is built by repeated returns. You return when you choose not to announce your detachment just to be seen. You return when you delay the first reaction long enough for wisdom to enter. You return when you accept the pattern instead of arguing with it. You return when you let someone misunderstand you without handing them your whole inner world. You return when you choose distance early enough to protect your heart from resentment. And then, in quieter ways, you keep returning. You stop waiting for the final explanation to make the story clean. You stop reopening the wound in your mind, as if pain will eventually give you a better answer. You place your energy back into what is yours to control. Slowly, almost without drama, you begin building a life that is not arranged around one person's presence or absence. That is where silence becomes different. At first, silence may feel like restraint. You are holding back words, holding back reactions, holding back the part of you that wants to be understood immediately. But over time, if the silence is clean, it becomes less about holding back and more about returning inward. You are no longer silent because you are waiting. You are silent because the argument has ended inside you. That is a very different place to live from. There may never be a perfect ending. They may never say the words you hope to hear. They may never understand the full cost of what happened. They may carry a version of you that feels unfair, incomplete, or convenient for them. And yes, that can hurt. But your peace cannot remain dependent on a person who may never become honest enough to offer you peace. At some point, your own life has to matter more than the missing answer. Your body needs you back. Your work needs you back. Your future needs you back. The steady people in your life need the version of you that is not always half absent, thinking about someone who could not meet you clearly. And more than anyone, you need yourself back, not as a harder person, as a more honest one, someone who can feel pain without obeying it completely, Someone who can love without surrendering all proportion. Someone who can step back without hatred. Someone who can be misunderstood and still remain rooted. Someone who no longer confuses silence with weakness or intensity with love or waiting with loyalty. This is the quiet strength Stoicism keeps pointing toward, not control over other people. Control over the part of you that wants to be controlled by them, because that is where the real battle usually lives, not in their message, not in their silence, not in whether they regret anything. The deeper struggle is inside the moment, where your mind wants to leave itself and go live inside their reaction. Detachment is the practice of staying home, inside your own character, inside your own responsibility, inside the life that still belongs to you. And maybe that is the most important thing to remember. You are not trying to erase what happened. You are not trying to become someone who never cared. The goal is not to prove that they meant nothing. Some people did mean something. Some chapters did shape you. Some wounds did teach you lessons you would not have chosen. But a chapter can be meaningful without becoming the whole book. A wound can be real without becoming your identity. A person can matter without being allowed to govern the rest of your life. So let the process be quiet. Let it be slower than your ego wants. Let it be less dramatic than the pain hoped for. Let there be days when you feel strong and days when you simply practice returning. You do not need to perform healing perfectly. You only need to stop abandoning yourself in the name of what hurt you. That is enough for today. One cleaner response. One old thought interrupted. One boundary kept without a speech. 1 hour of attention returned to your own life. These small things may not look powerful from the outside, but they are how freedom is built. Not through one grand decision, but through many quiet moments where you choose not to give the old pattern the authority it used to have. And one day, the silence will no longer feel like effort. It will feel like peace, not because everything was explained, not because they finally understood, not because the past became painless, but because you stopped asking the past for permission to live fully now. That is what it means to detach in silence. You do not disappear, you return. You return to your own mind, your own dignity, your own future, your own life. And when you truly return, their power over you begins to fade, not because you forced it to, but because there is no longer enough empty space inside you for the old disturbance to rule. Your peace has found a deeper home. And this time, it is not in them. It is in you.